main speakers. Okay, we will do some introductory talks, and the Honorable Minister will join in the meantime. Okay. How many have? So, good afternoon to everybody from Dhaka. Good morning to anybody who's probably in the morning. Maybe it's Dr. So, who's probably joining from Washington. Thank you, Dr. So. It must be very early in the morning for you.
No, I'm actually joining from our Bangkok office. But thank you for inviting me.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
So more reasonable time for me.
Okay. We have with us in the PRI conference room, Mr. Yusuf Harun, Member of Parliament, who's a member of the Standing Committee, Parliamentary Standing Committee on Ministry of Commerce. They review the policies of Ministry of Commerce, and Mr. Harun actually is a business leader. He used to be the president of the apex body, FPCCI, and also president of SARC Chamber, if I recall that correctly. And, you know, I remember while he was president of FPCCI, there was a lot of interaction with the World Bank, and some policies, new policies were introduced during those days. We also have the former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce, Dr. Jafaruddin with us, who is now heading the Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute. He has, I welcome him also. He's very interested in trade policy research. We have, as our distinguished panelist, another business leader, a young generation leader, I would say, Mr. Rizwan Rahman, who is the president of Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Are you joining us from Dubai or from Bangladesh?
Yes, sir. I'm joining from Dubai. Assalamu alaikum.
You are joining us. Welcome, Mr. Rizwan. And then we have our own Dr. Mohammad Razak, is a leading trade economist, headed the trade section in the Commonwealth Secretariat for a long time. And he's with us now as a research director and an expert on what is going on in the international trade circles. He's very conversant with who's doing what and what are the various prospects for the different economies in South Asia, East Asia, and as well as rest of the world. So we look forward to hearing from him. Alongside me, we have Dr. Sadiq Ahmed, our vice chairman of PRI. But Dr. Sadiq is known to the World Bank colleagues very well. He used to be the director of, country director of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and those countries. He used to be the chief economist for South Asia for some time. And of course, we used to have poverty. He was the director of poverty reduction and economic management, the PREM units, the country program, the macro program. So, and Dr. O, thank you so much. I consider you as the head of the global World Bank program on macroeconomics, trade, and investment. So, and plus you're in charge of the public sector as well. Therefore, I'm looking forward to your bringing in the global context in which Bangladesh trade is playing a critical role, and trade is definitely a very important part of it. I think we will start. The Honourable Minister will be joining us in a few minutes. In the meantime, we just gave them the idea that we will do some introductory remarks, and we'll get into it. Before the presentation, or before Dr. So's remarks, we would like to wait for the minister. So is there anything that you would like to share with us just to get things going? Anybody? Dr. So, please share with us anything you want to say before. I would like your introductory remarks to come in once the minister is there, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'll wait.
We're just a bit, there was some, the minister's secretary just told me that, they were just getting onto it. They had a bit of a timing issue, but the minister is just finishing up something before he joins us. Okay, but share with us any thoughts that you have, but I'd like you to make your introductory remarks once the Honorable Minister is there, if you don't mind, okay?
I mean, as you say, I have some opening remarks prepared, short remarks. So just I wanted to thank PRI, of course, for organizing today's webinar. And the CEM is anybody who knows the bank and has worked with the bank knows the importance of this exercise. It's the main economic diagnostics exercise for the World Bank, and for a country as important as Bangladesh, it's quite critical, and it will, as they say, it will attract a lot of eyeballs. There will be lots of interest from the very high up to down to the technical level among our colleagues, and so it's quite important to us. And of course, the topic today is trade, which is among the many topics, I think, one of the most interesting and critical topic for Bangladesh. So we very much look forward to the discussions today.
Excellent. Yeah. Right. Mr. Rizwan from Dubai, you want to share some of your sort of opening feelings about what is coming in this discussion, but you can hold on to your specific remarks on the presentation, because the presentation will be coming. So you want to spend a bit of time there?
Absolutely.
Anything that you want to say about the private sector?
I'm looking forward to the presentation, because it's going to be you can say a learning phase for us. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about boosting competitiveness. Whenever we're talking about competitiveness, the reason behind it is the post-graduation challenges primarily. So of course, to be honest, we spent 2021 talking about how we're going to come out of it. But I believe that 2022 is going to be the implementation stage, because if you see 2024 or 2026 is just around the corner, and we barely have any time. So tariff liberalization and trade negotiations. We've got the BFTI here. I know that they have been working tirelessly for the free trade agreements and many other preferential. I'm, on the other hand, really pro PTA. I'm more on a, you can say, FTA guy, because preferential is subject to your own preferences. Rather, free trade should be open-ended for both countries. So I think we lack, I'll be very abrupt and frank, that we lack a bit of negotiation skills. I think we need to be able to put our thoughts forward. Like I always say, whenever we're negotiating, the policymakers should be backed by economists, think tanks, research analysts, or educationists, even mathematicians, when you talk about tariff liberalization, right? And then also trade negotiations. So these kind of things need to be addressed strongly. And maybe we can use examples of recently graduated LDCs in the last few years, how they have been coping up. So that is something we need to create and maybe bring them into Bangladesh to have a, what do you call it, a inclusive stakeholder consultation. So that's something I look forward to. Otherwise, I'm going to be learning today here, but I'm going to give you a few thoughts as we hear the presentation today.
Thank you very much. And we have Dr. Razak, who's just the expert on all those issues that you raised. And we will definitely hear from him as he gives his comments on the presentation.
Absolutely. Whenever Dr. Razak is speaking, I turn into a student. So
there you are. Wonderful. That's good news. Okay. Nora is Dr. Sila Lakatos. Is she joining in from what? Oh, there she is. Oh, hello. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello, Dr. Lakatos. Thank you. Thank you for joining in. Again, are you joining in from Washington or Bangkok?
I'm actually in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you must be in a reasonably
Time is reasonable.
good time. Okay. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
yeah.
We're just delaying the start of this session a bit because the minister is finishing up something and he will join. So we're just exchanging views here. Would you like to introduce yourself? That would be nice, I think.
Of course, yeah. So I'm Sheila Lakatosh, Senior Trade Economist, currently in charge of the World Bank's trade agenda in Indonesia as well as Timor-Leste. So, with Nora, who covers some of the South Asian countries, we like to work together because, there's obviously things to learn from synergies and potential collaboration across countries. So that's how I fell into this conversation.
Wonderful.
But
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Harry.
Thank you. May I now request Nora, Dr. Nora TL, to introduce herself. I know you very well, but maybe the participants would like to hear from you.
Yes, thank you. So good afternoon from Bangkok. I am based in Bangkok. I'm a senior trade economist and I cover some certain South Asian countries, including Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is really my main focus these days because of this important CEM, and the trade agenda is an important module. So I really look forward to this discussion. This is, I think it's something new that we are doing as part of the CM. We are conducting the consultations on these preliminary results to make sure that we are taking on board the views from the stakeholders in the final report. And I'm really grateful to PRI for facilitating this, this webinar. So look forward to your comments to the discussions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think, this is what the World Bank does best. The World Bank mobilizes the best minds from all over the world and then links them up with the local, the knowledge, researchers. And that's where we come in. So the World Bank partners in the local area where, like Bangladesh, the net result of the interdependence, the interlinkage of the best minds from around the world with the best available minds in the Bangladesh scenario, that gives the policy. So whatever, the program or the roadmap the World Bank is preparing for Bangladesh, this combination hopefully gives us the best outcome in terms of the quality of policy programs and the quality of advice that comes out of the World Bank, a multilateral institution like the World Bank. I think this is the thing that we are all expecting.
Nora, is this your third consultation or is the first one? Because what I thought was you are having a series of consultations in different institutions on different topics.
So it's the second one. We had a consultation on the macroeconomic chapter last week, and another one on urbanization will follow on March 3rd, on Thursday, and another one on on the financial sector. But we had consultations on the overall CEM at the very beginning when we drafted the concept note. And it was really jointly with government and private sector stakeholders that we defined the modules of the CEM, including trade. And this is how trade was selected because it was a high priority. It's an important contributor to growth. And yeah, this is, as I said, these consultations are happening on an ongoing basis.
And when you have the final report, before you share with the government, are you going to have another round of discussions or post-government, or this is it?
We will have dissemination events, and I really hope to be able to work with you again and perhaps focus on certain reforms which can be implemented more quickly, so we can have a more granular approach depending on the appetite. But yes, we are planning extensive dissemination events of the entire report, including the trade module.
Yeah, it will be good because the kind of issues you're covering are very topical and of interest to the broader policy reform agenda. So it will be good to have the whole picture together, the consistency and interlinkages of the different issues and how they add up to the economy. So that would be very useful.
Yeah. May I now invite Dr. Jafaruddin, who's with us today. He's the preceding Secretary of the Ministry of Commerce. He was there for 3-4 years, and he has seen through a lot of the research that we will soon be presenting, and Dr. Nora will be presenting. So Dr. Jafar, would you like to join us, share some of your thoughts and ideas?
Sir, thank you, sir, for giving me opportunity to share my feelings. Basically, today I have prepared myself to be a good listener. So, however, the title is very contemporary, sir, boasting Bangladesh's trade competitiveness. Since I had been in the Ministry of Commerce and Ministry of Finance, so my experience dictates that we need to have this sort of seminar, workshop, or research study. And thank you, sir. And thanks to PRI, World Bank, for coming together and for doing such wonderful seminar. And I hope we'll get some inspiration and way forward, particularly our LDC, post-LDC preparation. And we know we have some limiting factors, single basket, export basket, there's a huge mismatch between the first and second product. So this is a huge challenge. Right. So competitiveness, for harnessing competitiveness, we need to have some initiatives, particularly with regard to technology, skill development, and compliance issues. I think I personally, I have developed the TSC model, technology, skill, and compliance. So all these 3 dimensions should be together to look into all these 3 issues. And the product diversification and market diversification, and the human resource diversification. I call 3 diversification, not 2, not only product, not only country, but personally I need to diversify myself also. So I need to adapt to the global scenario because our competitors, they are very strong. We should not undermine them. So that is why we need to develop our skill, our negotiation skill, our functional skill, all kinds of skills. So this is all about my feelings. Hopefully from this seminar, we'll get some light, some hope, some inspiration to go forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Jafaruddin, the CEO of Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute. That's the research arm of the Ministry of Commerce. May I now invite Mr. Yusuf Harun, MP, to share some of his thoughts. He will, of course, be giving regular remarks at the end after the presentation and before the closing. But please share some of your ideas.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I've been through many, many seminars in my lifetime, particularly when I entered the MPCCI leadership. We have a lot of discussions. We basically know the major issues, but where we fall down is implementation. That's where we really need to get our acts together. Otherwise, time is very short, 4 or 5 years just run like that. We need to do a lot of coordination, a lot of homework. The basic issue we have is when you look at ease of doing business, cost of doing business, factors impeding our foreign investments. These are issues which we have been discussing for a long time. We haven't had much success, although the local investors have came up recently and invested quite heavily in many new areas. But we still have few items, few exporters and few markets. So we need to really get our acts together to diversify our products further, to have more market access. So these are the issues that we can work on very closely. And also, since the post-graduation period is around the corner, we need to really get ourselves ready for that, because we have seen many countries attaining graduation from LDC, but they're languishing there today, with the exception of countries like South Korea. So we really need to see what went wrong and how we need to proceed and address and prepare ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf Harun. I think what we'll do is, why don't I invite Dr. Sadiq Ahmed now to make some introductory opening remarks while we wait for the Honorable Minister. Hopefully, we'll have something we'll be hearing from him. Okay.
Yeah, I think, because it's getting quite late. It's already almost 3:30. Do you want to try the minister and see?
Minister to Dorina.
No. I think it's better that we start the process, because we do not really know, because politicians, they have competing priorities, and if they have been called to the Prime Minister's office, then we do not even know if he will come at all or not. Okay.
Let's proceed.
Mr. Yusuf Abdullah Harun MP, Dr. Zaidi Sattar, and distinguished participants from all across the world, I would say, because we have representation from Jakarta, from Manila, from Bangkok. Is anybody from Washington? I hope not, because this is a very ungodly hour.
Nobody's from Washington.
Okay, thank you. On behalf of the Policy Research Institute, I'm pleased to welcome you all to this consultative meeting on a highly topical development issue facing Bangladesh today, which is how to boost Bangladesh's trade competitiveness with a view to accelerating the expansion of exports, GDP growth, and employment. The subject of export competitiveness is one of the core themes of the forthcoming World Bank Country Economic Memorandum. I welcome this focus on export competitiveness and commend the World Bank team for sharing some quality analysis and preliminary results with this meeting. Bangladesh should be justifiably proud of its impressive track record on progress with the export sector. The swift recovery from COVID-19 impact is particularly impressive. Monthly export earnings data show that Bangladesh is well on track to reach $50 billion in export earnings in fiscal year 22, compared with a mere $34 billion in fiscal year 20. This 50% growth in 2 years is truly remarkable, and this puts the export growth back on the pre-COVID expansion path. You all are aware that in the COVID, the export took a slide, but the recovery is now much more than the slide, and as a result, growth path is around 7-8% on a long-term trend basis, which is very good. Yet, I'm sure the government is aware of the many challenges it faces on the export front, especially in terms of the heavy and growing concentration on the ready-made garment sector. This is a topic well discussed in Bangladesh, and of course, the upcoming LDC graduation and the associated transition costs in terms of possible loss of export earnings. There's a lot of analysis already been done, and the government is well aware of what these losses can be. At the national level, we at the Policy Research Institute have been on the forefront of trade policy analysis. And our research has consistently emphasized the need for tariff reduction. And you see Dr. Zaidi Sattari, last 20, 25, 30 years, he is talking about the same subject when he was with the World Bank and after the World Bank. And behind the border reforms, I think that the attention on behind the border reforms is somewhat more recent, but it has been there persistently in order to reduce the transaction costs and improve the incentives for exports. We also emphasize the importance of FDI, GVC, and FTAs. So it is very reassuring to see that these recommendations also find a prominent place in the World Bank analysis, which is in many ways complementary and reinforces the messages we have been giving to the government earlier. One surprising aspect of the World Bank export competitive analysis is the absence of the role of real exchange rate. I was very surprised by that. For export competitiveness and export diversification. I'm aware that there is some controversy on the subject. We have also debated with the IMF. But to my mind, there is little doubt that the sharp appreciation of the real effective exchange rate since 2006 has been a major constraint to export growth and diversification in Bangladesh. It would be good to hear the World Bank views on the subject. Another missing element is the employment effects of trade protection and the role of exports in job creation. Today in Bangladesh, good job creation is arguably the most pressing development challenge. We at PRI believe that an export-led growth strategy is the best way forward. We did some limited research on this specific issue, but on the other hand, there is a big contrary and populist view, which some of the government also shares, that trade protection is a better job creation strategy. I think this debate has been going on for a while, which has prevented a meaningful dialogue on the need for trade liberalization. This populist perception must be countered and with good analysis in order to have a real political economy discussion of export competitiveness issue linked to tariff reduction. If parts of the government supported by local economists believe that trade protection is the way to go for job creation, then I think we have a very tough agenda to sell the liberalization agenda, which is one of the reasons why we have been faltering from the PRI. So I think this missing of this element is a major limitation of the report. Finally, on impact analysis, I really commend the World Bank for what I thought was a pretty thorough use of available empirical and quantitative techniques for assessing the impact of policy reform. But the focus of the impact analysis, as far as I understood, was on the benefits of bilateral, regional, and cross-regional trade integration. My sense is it would also be very helpful if you use your model to estimate the impact on Bangladesh export GDP and employment of just say a 50% reduction in tariff and 15% reduction in trade costs as we did, but not in the context of a FTA necessarily, but if just a generalized policy information. But that would be very important for the government, because FTAs may or may not happen because there are two sides and the two-side minds may not happen. But trade reforms for the Bangladesh perspective and reduction in the transaction costs of exports, that's something is in the control of Bangladesh, and they should do it irrespective of whether or not they do FTA. So it will be good to know, we know of the revenue loss, but there are also some countervailing effects in terms of export earnings, in terms of GDP and employment. So I think that simulation will be very helpful. Thank you for your attention and welcome you all again, and look forward to an engaging and very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Dhanyavad. Thank you, Dr. Sadiq, for your introductory, very welcoming remarks. I have to inform everybody we are fortunate to have our Honorable Minister, Mr. Tipu Munshi, MP, Minister for the Ministry of Commerce. আপনাকে আমাদের আন্তরিক কৃতজ্ঞতা জানাচ্ছি। আপনি আপনার এই সময়ের মধ্যে, এত ব্যস্ততার মধ্যে আমাদের সাথে জয়েন করতে পেরেছেন। অনেক অনেক কৃতজ্ঞতা এবং ধন্যবাদ জানাই আপনাকে। I'm sorry that আপনার সাথে আমার কথা হয় নাই, বাট আপনার অফিসের মাধ্যমে আপনার অনুষ্ঠানের ব্যবস্থা হয়েছে। So thank you very much for your kind, for giving us this time. I think we are also joined by our Executive Director, Dr. Ahsan Mansoor. Would you like to give us some introductory remarks? Okay. So may I now, I think now we can invite our distinguished guest from the World Bank, Dr. Hoon Sahib So, who is the Practice Manager for Macroeconomics, Trade, Investment, and Public Sector, to share his introductory remarks about this particular research and the potential roadmap that we are going to see from the World Bank in the area of trade and trade policy of Bangladesh in the coming years. Dr. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Honorable Minister, Ministry of Commerce, Mr. Tipu Munshi, respected member, Parliamentary Standing Committee on Ministry of Commerce, Bangladesh Parliament, Mr. Yusuf Abdullah Harun, respected Chairman, PRI, Policy Research Institute, Dr. Zaidi Sattar, respected Vice Chairman, PRI, Dr. Sadiq Ahmed, respected President, Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Rizwan Rahman, respected Research Director, PRI, Dr. Abdul Razak, senior officials from the Ministry of Finance, National Board of Revenue, Bangladesh Trade and Tariff Commission, Bangladesh Investment Development Authority, Ministry of Industries, Ministry of Agriculture, prominent think tanks and leading private sector representatives of Bangladesh, and finally, colleagues from the World Bank Group. A very good afternoon to everyone. I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you to today's virtual Bangladesh Country Economic Memorandum, CEM consultation, co-organized with PRI. I would like to thank PRI for organizing today's important webinar. I would also like to thank PRI for the useful data work on tariffs and trade flows, and for sharing the data sets needed for the CM analysis with the World Bank. So thank you very much. The Country Economic Memorandum is one of the World Bank's 4 core country analytics that aims at identifying the key growth constraints in the medium term and to propose policy measures to address them. An important module of the CEM covers trade, focused on increasing a country's international competitiveness to help countries develop through export-led growth. I am originally from East Asia, and I worked in the East Asia region of the World Bank before joining the South Asia Regional Department. In East Asia, trade is central to virtually all of the World Bank's discussions with our client countries. Many of you are most likely familiar with examples of successful export-led growth in East Asia. I believe personally that Bangladesh has similar potential to leverage exports for development, building on its successes with exports of ready-made garments. However, Bangladesh's ratio of goods exports to GDP actually decreased from 16.7% to 9.9% between 2010 and 2020. By contrast, as an example, Cambodia's export ratio increased from 34.7%, already fairly high, to 67% over the same period. Thus, I believe Bangladesh is at an important crossroads for development. As part of its export-led growth vision, the country needs to address multiple policy issues to unleash private sector growth and investment towards its goals outlined in the second perspective plan and the 8th five-year plan. The country is expected to graduate from the least developed country status in the coming years, and this will entail potential changes in its preferential market access and special and differential treatment benefits under the World Trade Organization, WTO. Those changes from the LDC graduation will have significant implications for the tariff regime in Bangladesh, as the country needs to make a strategic shift away from reliance on trade taxes toward establishing a more effective domestic tax system. Tariff modernization is one of those reforms the country can start immediately to build a more competitive economy with a more diversified export base. Bangladesh's current tariff structure is found to be encouraging firms to be more domestic market oriented rather than export markets. This does not support the export-led growth vision of the country and the export diversification goal as well. So high tariff protection also comes with the cost. It not only reduces competitiveness of the businesses, but also taxes the general consumer. Modernizing the tariff structure will also significantly improve the revenue performance, generate investments, and boost export-led growth. World Bank and PRI research have highlighted to Bangladeshi policymakers on the consequences of anti-export biases of current policies. Going beyond tariffs, Bangladesh also needs to prioritize the investment and services agenda to help companies in all sectors adopt to the rapidly evolving technological disruptions. Furthermore, regional integration can help speed up market diversification and economic growth in a post-pandemic world. Today's workshop will shed light on these aspects based on research findings from analysis conducted by the World Bank Group team. And consultations in forums such as today is extremely important for us to help us finalize the CM report. These workshops, we also hope, will contribute to the development of a network of policymakers and think tanks in Bangladesh, as well as in international partners, who could help us actively engage on the CM and its policy recommendations, and to help promote key policy reforms such as the national tariff policy for Bangladesh. Again, I want to wish all of you very best luck and look forward to contributing to the trade policy debates in Bangladesh going forward through the CM discussions. Thank you very much. I think you're on mute.
Yes, we can't hear you. You need to unmute.
Okay, sorry, it's back now. Now, I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Sov, for your, pointing out some very critical challenges in the area of trade policy and trade for Bangladesh going forward. And I think you've hit the nails on the head, I would say. Very interestingly, I think people should know that the whole paradigm of export-led growth did not emerge from the World Bank. It came out of East Asia. So East Asian countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, they were the first, newly industrializing countries who took, this idea of growth through exports. And so East Asia gave a new idea to the world, which Bangladesh, belatedly, I would say, but Bangladesh did, subscribe to this particular policy. And today, Bangladesh is an export-oriented economy, and they have accepted the idea of export-led growth. And that is what has yielded results for Bangladesh, good results. And I think one of the things you pointed out, and it's often missed out here, is that tariff rationalization is a big challenge being faced by Bangladesh right now because of the fact that it hurts exports as well. People think that the tariff structure is one thing, export is another thing. Tariff is only about revenue, but that is not the case. There is a conflict between incentives for exports and what is going on with the tariff structure. So that is important. The other point that you just raised is critical. There are costs for protection, and one of the costs, of course, is to the consumer. So if consumers have to pay this protection cost, so you need to really, it's part of political economy to see that consumers are not being taxed too much and for too long. So this is an important policy idea that I think Bangladesh should take on board. And I think in our past interaction with the Ministry of Commerce, we have tried to explain the implications of that idea. And as you pointed out, a national tariff policy, I think it is time for introducing a national tariff policy for Bangladesh. And I think the government is currently exploring that idea. There are meetings taking place, and hopefully there will be something in the coming days. So that brings us to the main presentation of today by Dr. Nora DL and Dr. Sila Lakatos. And I had, prepared a little bit of initial remarks before, inviting you, if I may. For the past 50 years, Bangladesh has proved to the world that it can be a highly competitive trading nation. Trade, not aid, is now our motto. Bangladesh's progress in the trade sphere confirms the triumph of comparative advantage in apparel production, a relatively labor-intensive activity, best suited for our cheap, low-skilled labor. But can this comparative advantage be taken for granted for the next decade, when a lot of changes are going to take place? What other factors can strengthen our comparative advantage? These are going to be the subject matter of our presentation today. It is undeniable the World Bank has been a strong partner of Bangladesh's development, particularly in its switch from an inward-looking, import-substituting, low-growth economy to an outward-looking, export-oriented, high-growth economy. Greater trade openness and embracing the policy of export-led growth has yielded large dividends. I just mentioned that. But it's also led to rapid growth, job creation, and poverty reduction. The first phase of trade policy reform, I think, is now over. Export success has been achieved, but concentration in RMG adds vulnerability for the whole economy from any future shock. There is strong justification, therefore, for replication of policies adopted for the RMG exports to non-RMG exports. Diversifying our export basket is the immediate challenge, and it is a national imperative to launch the second phase of trade policy reforms, not least because LDC graduation will take place in 2026. There is strong research evidence that our tariff protection structure is a significant barrier to boosting exports and its diversification. Modernization of the tariff structure is one of several measures needed to diversify and strengthen our export competitiveness. Maintaining a flexible exchange rate regime will also be a big support to export competitiveness. And other measures are there, like signing FTAs, foreign free trade agreements, attracting export-seeking FDI, and reducing trade costs by improving trade facilitation. All of these are issues, I think, that will be raised in our presentation today. With this, may I now invite Dr. Nora DL and Dr. Sila Lakatos, both senior economists in macroeconomics, trade, and investment part of the World Bank. Dr. Nora and Dr. Sila. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Zaidi Sattar. So let me share the screen for the slides. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, yes. Yes, we can.
And you see them in presentation mode? Yes. Yes, now I see them as well. Okay, thank you very much. So I will start the presentation, and I will focus on diversification and tariff modernization, and my colleague Sheila Lokotos will continue with the different integration scenarios. So we have already established that this trade webinar is conducted as part of the CEM, and it was identified as a growth constraint. So why is trade a growth constraint? Because we all agree that trade has been vital to Bangladesh's economic development. But as you can see on that slide, we are showcasing the limited diversification. Bangladesh managed to benefit from its low labor cost and preferential access to markets in advanced economies. And that export was led growth was driven mainly by ready-made garments. So exports have contributed to the country's remarkable growth by creating jobs, by reducing poverty over the past decades. But at this stage, at less than 15% of GDP, exports are extremely low as compared to other countries at similar level of development. The current export basket remains heavily dependent on ready-made garments. It is above 85% in total exports, and it has been like that over the past decades. If we look at data, we observe a declining trend of growth contribution from manufacturing exports over the past 5 years, and that started even before the COVID shock. So growth of manufacturing is coming more from non-exporting industries at this stage. So this over-reliance on ready-made garments really raises questions about the sustainability of Bangladesh's growth model. And this will be further challenged by the erosion of preferences with the LDC graduation, as well as by the erosion of competitiveness based on low wages. So that's why a main focus of our analysis is how to diversify exports. This will be the first part of my presentation. Just to look at the current situation. So Bangladesh has a limited export competitiveness. If we put it in a comparative stand, we see that the performance of Bangladeshi exporters is lagging behind that of several comparators. We have India, and we have also the averages for a number of regions. Bangladesh has fewer exporters than all the aspirational peers in South Asia and other regions. And these exporters are significantly smaller and less diversified product-wise, suggesting that Bangladeshi firms really struggle to be competitive internationally. If we look at the entry-exit rates, we see that both these rates are much higher than the South Asian average. You can see that on the left side. Left and middle. So entry and exit rates are higher, and this suggests an extremely high turnover in Bangladesh's export market. And furthermore, the new entrants are characterized by very low survival rates. This you can observe on the right-hand side. Actually, those survival rates are comparable to those observed in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, on the bright side, we see that those companies which participate in global value chains have a much higher survival rate. And this is observable in terms of the number of products that are being exported, the number of transactions that the company is engaged in, as well as the number of destination markets which are being served. So this analysis is based on the World Bank's exporter dynamic database, firm level data, but we supplemented the comparative assessment with new empirical analysis that looks at conditional survival estimates to understand the specific patterns in Bangladesh's exports. So we are using here a data set from the National Board of Revenue that contains transaction level customs export and import data for 2005, from 2005 until 2016. Access to more recent data, so from 2016 till 2020, would provide us with much better insights into what is actually happening on the ground. And we could also have additional insights into the impact of the COVID shock on exporters. However, we work with what we have, and we try to see what are the determinants of export survival. So the empirical, the econometric model is explained in the annex, but I would like to focus here on the key results. So we are looking at the different characteristics of the export transaction, product characteristics, firm characteristics, firm type, and see how they affect the export survival of companies. So you can see that, for instance, the level of exports or the number of destinations at the beginning of the exporting period has a positive impact on export survival. So it increases. The higher the exports, the higher the number of destination markets, the more likely is that those companies will survive for a longer period. The same goes for the research and development intensity of products. When we look at the firm's characteristics, we see that the research, staying with the research and the R&D intensity, both the R&D intensity of exports and imports has a positive impact on the survival of exporters. Very interestingly, firms which export and import from the same region, and this could be thought as an equivalent to GVC participation, they have a higher survival rate. So I think this has very interesting policy implications for the different FTAs, which could be undertaken by Bangladesh. It's a very interesting finding. The analysis also confirms that the GVC participation increases the export survival rate. Well, if we look at those factors, those determinants which reduce export survival, we see that imports tariff have a very significant negative impact on the survival rate of exporters. And that negative impact is holding even when we combine it with GVC participation. So it has an equally negative impact for the stronger companies, yes, for the GVC participants. And I think this is really an important finding that shows that tariff modernization, reforms of tariffs, will be extremely important for Bangladesh if it wants to continue this export-led growth strategy. So in a nutshell, what we find from this empirical analysis, that GVC participation is extremely important for export survival, that R&D intensity matters, both in terms of exports and imports, so inputs and outputs, yes? That regional linkages increase export survival. But when we are talking about regional linkages, we are thinking about a broader region. It's not only about South Asia. So we are looking at the broader Asia region. And the lower export survival is attributed to the protective tariff regime. So it shows that reforms in this sector is imperative, and I will focus now on, in the second part, on the modernization of tariffs to increase trade competitiveness. Because it's not only the current tariff regime, but also the LDC graduation, which will exacerbate the negative impact of these tariffs. So the lack of export diversification can be at least partly attributed to the country's protective tariff regime. So average tariffs in Bangladesh increased from 14.8% without the para tariffs to about 30% if the para tariffs are being included. So as you can see in this figure. So Bangladesh is around 30%, and these numbers are for fiscal year 2019-2020. Now, if we look at Bangladesh tariff regime, it is in principle relatively straightforward. We have 6 ad valorem tariff rates: 0, 1, 5, 10, 15, and 25%. And over 95% of tariff lines are ad valorem. So it means that the tariff regime is transparent. But there are additional taxes on imports, 10 specific duties, which reduce the transparency of the tariff regime. For example, we have the regulatory duty, which is charged exclusively on imports. It's mainly at 3% and affects about half of the tariff lines. Then further, we have exemptions to value-added tax. We have supplementary duty for domestic production, but not on imports. And this results in additional charges on imports that affect about a quarter of tariff lines. So if we add the para tariffs, then the number of tariff lines in Bangladesh increases from 6, those which I mentioned at the beginning, to 50%. And this is quite an unusual case with serious impact on the competitiveness of the country. So let's look at these tariffs in a comparative manner. And we see that the average tariffs in Bangladesh are much higher than in the selected comparator countries, because mainly driven by those para tariffs. And this is especially true for intermediate goods, again, and that exhibits important substantive tariff escalation. So the average tariff rate on intermediate goods in Bangladesh is 18.8%. And this is more than double the rate in China. You can see it on the right-hand side, where it is 7.9%, or Vietnam, 7.5%, Thailand, 7%. It is closer to the rate in India. But the MFN tariffs on intermediate goods would need to be cut in half from 12.4%, I think, yes, to 6%, and all other import taxes eliminated for Bangladesh to reach similar levels of taxation on intermediate goods as those prevalent in East Asian countries. And in addition, with an almost 30 percentage point difference in tariffs, including other import taxes for consumer and intermediate goods, Bangladesh shows the highest tariff escalation among comparators by a really, really wide margin. So digging a little bit deeper into the high para tariffs, we show in the report how they protect domestic industries and introduce an anti-export bias. So over time, the difference between tariffs on inputs and outputs has increased, leading to a high degree of protection, mostly to domestically produced consumer goods. And this additional import taxes substantively increase tariff escalation in sectors, if you look at the graph, such as transport equipment and textiles, where the average nominal protection for final goods is 4 and 2 times higher than for intermediate goods. If you look at sector-specific studies at the firm level, they confirm that this high effective protection provides incentives for import substitution over exports, and it creates an anti-export bias. This is an area where the PRI had done extensive research. And I looked at an example of the effective protection rate from a survey of 15 leather goods and footwear manufacturers. And it suggests that the profitability from domestic sales is 2.5 times higher than that from exports. So obviously, this creates an incentive, this enclave approach, to focus on catering on domestic markets, and that cannot sustain an export growth at the rate required to accelerate growth or provide quality jobs in this particular context. So this situation will be exacerbated by the LDC graduation, because the LDC graduation expected in 2026 will further erode the country's competitiveness. And what we did on this slide, we summarized the implications not only for the graduation tariffs, but also in terms of the rules of origins. So, for instance, in the EU, where Bangladesh enjoys duty-free access for all products except arms, the graduation will have significant implications with the transition to the standard, or possibly to the standard GSP, or possibly GSP+. So there will be a significant reduction in tariffs. Similarly, the LDC, the rules of origins will change, and this will have important implications for the exports of companies. In the US, the effect won't be as strong as in the EU, because currently Bangladesh does not enjoy preferences. In other countries, it will have implications for tariffs and rules of origins, but because the level of exports are not as high as with the EU, so the effect will be less significant. The most implications are expected in terms of the access to the EU markets. And because of the concentration of exports in textiles and ready-made garments, so the decline to the LDC graduation is expected to reduce the exports to the EU by about 22%, with 12 products, as we can see here, with 12 products accounting for 3/4 of the impact. As I said, it's mainly ready-made garments and some food products, fish, prawns. So it reflective of the structure of Bangladesh exports. So LDC graduation those have different implications depending on product, depending on the destination market. But the declines in exports to the EU will be quite significant. So it is important for Bangladesh to gradually reduce and eliminate those para-tariffs, to engage as quickly as possible in this tariff modernization scenario, and ensure that the tariff structure is more comparable to what we see in some middle-income countries. It means also to reduce reliance on tariff revenues. But as was pointed out in the opening remarks, it is very important to consider the concerns related to loss of revenue, to loss of jobs, and adjustment costs in different sectors and by different companies. And to guide Bangladesh in its effort to modernize tariffs, we conducted a number of simulation scenarios to reduce the nominal protection rate and bring those levels to levels more comparable to what we see in India, China, and Vietnam. So what you see on this slide, we are summarizing the adjustment scenarios. In the first part, we are adjusting the tariffs to the levels of selected comparators And we are looking both at input and output levels to also adjust to address the tariff escalation. And in the second part, we are looking at a gradual reduction of the customs duties and also some of the para-tariffs like regular duties and supplementary duties from 25 to 22.5%. So it's really a gradual reduction. We are also trying to understand how to compensate for a hypothetical currency depreciation. So what type of customs duty reduction is needed for such a scenario. So these simulations were carried out with World Bank Tariff Reform Impact Simulation tool called TRIS. We have discussed it several times. So the tool, we provided technical assistance on this tool to different organizations in Bangladesh. It is a partial equilibrium spreadsheet tool that can be used to analyze the adjustment implications of trade reforms. So what it can do, it provides estimates on the impact of changes in tariffs on government revenue, import, protection, and prices. It uses very detailed data on actual revenues collected from trade, including all taxes which are levied on trade, not just tariffs. And so it can show the change in trade tax revenue, which is more relevant than the change in tariff revenues alone. So if we look at some of the results, we see that the tariff modernization simulation scenarios, which try to adjust the tariff structure to comparator country levels, can result in very high losses of revenue. The reductions of customs duties and other taxes to the level of other middle income countries such as China, India, and Vietnam can result in tariff revenue losses between 7.7 and 32%. So these are substantive losses. The changes in imports, by contrast, are less substantive. They remain quite small in all cases. But the adjustment, the gradual adjustment of trade policy following the government guidance, the government documents, will result in a much more manageable impact. So you can see that the different tariff modernization scenarios are producing tariff revenue losses that are below 2%. And this is a very substantive difference, as compared to the 7.7% or over 30% that we saw in terms of what we saw when we adjusted the tariff structure to peer country levels. Again, the impact on tariff on imports will remain moderate. What does it mean? So what are the policy implications? It means that these concerns over tariff over revenue loss are extremely important, and we agree that they may hamper modernization of the tariff regime. So it is clear that Bangladesh needs to remove the anti-export bias, but it also needs to address some of these concerns. And how can those concerns be addressed? So first of all, improving the revenue performance will definitely depend on broadening the tax base by reducing all the exemptions, by collecting other forms of taxes to increase income, and by strengthening the tax administration. We know that high tariffs and para-tariffs are adding to short-term revenue, but they have a negative impact on the economy because they encourage the use of resources in inefficient sectors. And on top of that, it also means that consumers are paying a much higher price and exporters do not get the most competitive inputs for export production. So there is also evidence that there could be significant recovery of the lost revenue from trade liberalization by middle-income countries. And this is something that Bangladesh could learn from some comparators which engaged in similar tariff policy reforms and address the loss of revenues. In addition to broadening the tax base, it will be also important to try to improve the revenue forecasting, because the revenue targets set in the annual budget will have a significant bearing on the trade policy stance of the countries, and strengthening capacity to produce and use sound analytical frameworks will increase support for the tariff reform agenda. At the beginning, it was mentioned that the cost of adjustment could be important and it could be a deterrent to implementing tariff reforms. And what we need to understand is which firms, which workers will be vulnerable to liberalization in the near term. So reducing the cost of adjustment from liberalization, I fully agree, is extremely important to generate support and address the political economy issues associated with the tariff modernization strategy. A few thoughts on the on how to address some of the revenue concerns. So the bank is currently undertaking public expenditure review, and some of the suggestions, for instance, like reducing the exemptions of the VAT application or shifting from indirect to direct taxes, could be helpful in addressing some of the revenue losses. Furthermore, a tax structure that is more aligned with that of competitors and coupled with an improved business climate can also gradually reduce the necessity of maintaining large tax expenditures to attract investment. So the implementation of a modern tax administration with increased capacity is an area that is currently being studied in the Bangladesh Public Expenditure Review. And we hope that this will provide some ideas on how to address the revenue losses that could be associated with tariff modernization. So if I quickly summarize some of the key findings from the our tariff modernization analysis, is that there is there is evidence that Bangladesh's lack of export diversification is to some extent determined by the protective trade regime. And it is also clear that the erosion of trade preferences in several developed countries due to graduation from LDC status will have a strong impact on reducing Bangladesh's competitiveness. Most affected, as expected, will be the exports to the EU, and those exports are concentrated mainly in ready-made garments, textiles, and to some extent in fish products. So tariff modernization is really crucial to increase competitiveness, but also to prepare for LDC graduation. And the scenarios are informed by the 8th five-year plan, but also the ongoing developments regarding Bangladesh's national tariff policy. So we believe that this TRIST tool can be a very useful tool in helping the relevant government agencies to design the different scenarios, looking understanding all the revenue implications of the different scenarios, And we fully agree that tariff modernization would need to be complemented by revenue performance improvements, and if I may add, also with measures to minimize the cost of adjustment, especially when it comes to vulnerable groups. So let me now hand over to my colleague Sheila to discuss the different integration scenarios and their implications for Bangladesh's trade competitiveness.
Thank you very much, Nora, and good afternoon again, Your Excellency, esteemed panel members, and to all the participants. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here for this interesting and really important discussion. So, to complement Nora's findings, the remaining part of our presentation will focus on exploring the benefits of deepening Bangladesh's integration into the global economy, but highlighting different tracks of integration. So here we are thinking specifically considering potential multilateral, regional, and also bilateral integration scenarios. Now, thinking about this on the flip side, we aim to really highlight and also quantify, so put numbers on the opportunity costs of no integration, or what Bangladesh is really missing out on by not undertaking some of these important and really much needed trade policy reforms. So just wanted to say, Dr. Sadiq, that in your introductory remarks, you raised a really interesting point. That is to say that in addition to these, multilateral, regional, and bilateral integration, we should consider unilateral integration as well. So just wanted to say big thanks for the suggestion, and we will definitely take this on board, because I think out of all the scenarios, this is definitely the one that we are missing as part of describing the big picture of trade policy aspects in Bangladesh. So thank you for that, Dr. Sadiq. All right, now next slide, please. Yeah, so when it comes to policies that could bolster Bangladesh's integration with global markets, being that either multilateral, regional, or bilateral, not surprisingly, what we find is that trade potential is really stymied by high tariffs, high trade costs, red tape, inefficient customs procedures, and other barriers to trade. So Nora has already very well described the landscape of tariff barriers to trade, but I would add to this that there are also significant non-tariff trade costs, which at an estimated ad valorem equivalent of about 200% really represent significant barriers to trade growth in Bangladesh. So, so if you think about these non-tariff trade costs, they cover not only natural barriers to trade. So for instance, here we are thinking distance from foreign markets, connectivity, language barriers, but also a wide range of policies, such as non-tariff measures and other policy-related impediments to trade. So in addition to these tariff and non-tariff measures that really raise the cost of trading for Bangladeshi firms, what we find that there are also major inefficiencies in border processes. So, for example, border and documentary compliance lead to major delays, and at a total of more than 300 hours. 300 hours it takes to comply with these documentary and border processes. These add up to the highest delays among countries in South Asia. So really significant and an important issue to tackle. Now, on the flip side of this, the implementation of the WTO trade facilitation agreement has been lagging behind. So currently it stands at the rate of about 10%, which also shows up in Bangladesh's performance and trade facilitation indicators, which for instance are only at about half of that of India and Pakistan. So another important area to keep an eye out on in terms of improving trade facilitation indicators. Yeah, next slide, please.
Clarification question, please. Another way. Before we got to the discussion, important question.
Sorry, I will. I'm not sure. I couldn't
Please
hear you very
continue.
well.
Please
Oh,
continue.
okay, got it. Thank you. So in terms of the methodology we use, without going too much into detail about technicalities, I just wanted to highlight a few of the details of the modeling framework we use, mostly because this is a novel methodology, and it departs from the original general equilibrium specification in two major ways. The first novelty is the explicit representation of activities of multinational companies and their cross-border operations. So here we move away from this representative producer assumption, bringing in this ownership aspect of companies as well. Now, the second novelty and related to this is the explicit representation of FDI stocks at the three-dimensional level. So the model that we use is the so-called Gtap Fdi model. This is a global CG, and it really comes with all the benefits and the limitations that global CG model bring to the table. But in addition to this, because of these new specifications that I highlighted, this model is also ideal for looking at linkages between trade and investment policy, but also at services trade policies. And in particular here, I'm thinking about mode 1, so cross-border services trade, but also mode 3 of services trade, which is delivery through foreign commercial presence. Next slide, please. So here we developed a few illustrative scenarios to really highlight the impacts on Bangladesh on a couple of interregional integration scenarios within South and East Asia, but also multilateral integration with the rest of the world. So for the moment, these are really just illustrative scenarios, and they are hypothetical, but they can definitely be tailored with additional assumptions based on feedback that we will also get from you. So the first scenarios focus on interregional integration, and they really want to show a progressively more ambitious reform agenda, building on little building blocks, starting with liberalization of tariffs, which are then complemented with liberalization of non-tariff measures, but also bringing in trade facilitation and the liberalization of barriers to FDI. And then moving on to the more of a multilateral integration, we have a scenario that captures the impact of a prolonged US-China trade war, but also we in the last scenario, we measure the so-called cost of non-integration for Bangladesh. All right, let's move to the results. Next slide. So now, looking at the results of the simulations, there are a couple of very clear messages that emerge. The first very obvious one is that there are significant gains for Bangladesh to be had by tackling these trade policy reform areas. So if you're used to working with CGE models, or if you're used to interpreting them and seeing them, you will find that their magnitude really stands out, and these are really what we consider significant gains for Bangladesh. Now, that being said, the results also show that Bangladesh is expected to reap higher gains from a comprehensive integration agenda that includes, in addition to tariffs, trade facilitation, NTMs, and FDI reforms. So for instance, here, just to give you a flavor, a comprehensive regional integration is shown to boost Bangladesh's export by 62%, compared to, on the other hand, the South Asian average of about 41%. So gains that are about 1/3 higher than the regional average. So now when it comes to multilateral integration, I just wanted to highlight the results of scenario 7, which represent the cost of no integration with the rest of the region. So here, the results really show that the opportunity costs of not pursuing this interregional integration agenda are significant, and they would cut the benefits of full multilateral integration by about 2/3. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Now, in addition to this multilateral and regional integration tracks, we also wanted to showcase two potential bilateral integration examples. So here we decided on two illustrative scenarios. On the one hand, a deep and comprehensive Bangladesh-EU trade agreement, and on the other one, Bangladesh-India, again, deep and comprehensive, implying, tariff, barrier, liberalization, NTMs, trade facilitation, and FDI. So we just picked this for the sake of, illustration, but we would be happy to consider additional ones based on your feedback. Now, without even looking at the results, what we expect is that such trade agreements could really benefit Bangladesh. Why? Well, on the one hand, the EU accounts for close to 60% of Bangladesh's goods exports, and India, on the other hand, accounts for about 15%. So just the sheer volume of trade that is already there, it's going to have a significant impact on the gains, and obviously the more ambition, the higher the results. Now, without going too much into detail, I just wanted to highlight that, as in the case of the average total and the interregional and non-tariff barriers between the EU and Bangladesh, and India and Bangladesh, those are also significant. So just as in the case of the totals, there's significant work to be done here on both tariff barriers and trade costs as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the results of what this would imply for Bangladesh, just wanted to focus on the main headliners. So in terms of boost to GDP, and obviously given the underlying liberalization assumptions that we made to run these scenarios, the impact of these two potential bilateral trade agreements on GDP are somewhat comparable. So about 0.4–0.5% GDP gain on the medium run. Now, when it comes to impact on exports, well, we find that a potential Bangladesh-India trade agreement would result in higher gains, with export gains about twice compared to that of a potential agreement with the EU. This is also partially because of existing preferences that Bangladeshi export already benefit in EU markets. Now, with a few sectoral exceptions, so we can look at things at the sectoral level as well. We find that these potential bilateral agreements boost exports almost nearly across the board, and they can contribute to diversification into higher value-added manufacturing, but also services sectors. So yeah, no, I think that I'll stop here with the results and move to the policy messages. I think that we wanted to highlight that potentially emerge from the results of these simulation exercises. So the first one is that there's really significant gains to be had for Bangladesh from comprehensive integration, like I said, which implies tariffs, non-tariff barriers, trade facilitation, and NTMs. But this considering also these three different tracks, so bilateral, regional, and multilateral integration. The second one is that in addition to manufacturing competitiveness, which we like to focus on, we wanted to highlight that it will be also important to prioritize the services reform agenda, to also help companies in all sectors to adapt this new environment with the post-COVID world and technological disruption.
Trade and factor services.
Yeah, so I think I'll stop here, but I'm very much looking forward to the discussion, and thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you to both of you, Dr. Nora and to Dr. Sheila, both senior economists at the macroeconomics, trade and investment part of the World Bank. They're so comprehensive, it's very difficult for me to even attempt to summarize, but I think I'll just pick up 3 or 4 messages coming out of these 2 long presentations. Very clearly, Dr. Nora has made the point, and I think by this time, the message has gone to the ministry of Commerce, the Ministry of Industries, and the National Board of Revenue, etc., where tariffs are are critically important. And I think one of the messages coming out from here is that our export diversification problem, part of it has to do with our tariff structure. So that is a message that has been given out. PRI research supported by World Bank has also shown these things in the past several years. We've had long discussions with the representatives from the Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Finance, etc. So this is a message that tells us that tariff modernization is a high priority right now. And the government has been very receptive to this idea, as we see from the development of several committees at the National Board of Revenue, as well as in the Ministry of Commerce. So I think there is some traction in what we might expect as some sort of a second phase of trade policy reforms coming up as a post-pandemic measure to strongly recover the Bangladesh economy. Without there's no option but to come up with these new ideas and the new strategies. And when I talk of new ideas, I think I've noticed that there are some striking new ideas coming out from the research. The research on this discovery and death, the idea that some of the exports really don't last. And why is there so much of turnover? Why is the lifespan of, we've found that, from 2000, every year, roughly 40 to 50 new products enter the export basket, but they don't last. Our simple exercise, you've done some sophisticated analysis to show the exit and entry rates, and how does it compare with the other countries. In our simple exercise, we found that roughly 30% of the products that existed in year 2000 are still, existing in the export basket in 2021. Of course, in the case of ready-made garments, 250 plus products that are in the ready-made garment category, they last for a long time. They don't disappear. So we've got a good, permanence as far as ready-made garment products are concerned, and new products are coming up also in that. I think Dr. Chila has added the regional context, and there, I think we all agree that the potential for benefiting from integration with regional markets, global markets, I think are great, but that requires trade agreements to take place. And I think the government currently is engaged in trying to reach preferential trade agreements and particularly free trade agreements with some of the regions, and particularly East Asia Pacific is a really prospective region because the economies in this area are growing really fast, and quote unquote, the future is going to be Asian is now a buzzword in international analysis. So regional integration, the idea of integration regionally, globally is very worthwhile, and the benefits are going to be large. The other thing that Dr. Nora has pointed out is the revenue analysis of tariff adjustments. This is one critical element in the policy circle. And the conclusion there is that revenue impacts would be moderate. So even if you happen to reduce tariffs in the rationalization process, it's not going to be a big loss in terms of revenue. In fact, growth, we've checked the growth rate of imports for over 20 plus years. And we found that import growth itself will add, will bring in more revenues, even at lower tariffs. So the growth effects can counterbalance any tariff reduction effect. In our simulation, we do simple simulation, but I think TRIS would be very useful. we find that the growth effects do counter any loss of revenue coming out of tariff adjustments. So this is something that needs to be established. Okay, so now I think we are prepared to listen to the real experts. First of all, the private sector. You can't do trade without the private sector. And here we have one of the young generation private sector business leaders, Mr. Rizwan Rahman, President of the Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Please give your reactions, your views on what the course of trade policy should be in the medium term.
Thank you, sir. To be brief, well, young generation means the least experienced. So I'm going to go straight to the point. There has been much discussion about tariff. Conventionally, I'm going to skip that because just for the information of our friends from our chief guest and our special guest, yes, they represent the government, but they are actually the stars of the private sector. So whatever I'm going to say today, they will actually relate to it. I've been paying attention to Nora and I'm sure there was a lot of conversation about the tariffs, and then there was a lot of conversation about a taxation regime. So just for the information of our foreign friends, unfortunately, Bangladesh does have the highest tax rate in the region. We are above the global average. We are above the South Asia average, which makes it a bit competitive for the foreign direct investment to come in directly into Bangladesh, because at the end of the day, it's not rocket science. When they come in, they want to see whether they can tap the local market or whether they have access to exporting abroad by getting more and more incentives. And at the same time, what is the comparative tax? So when you're talking about Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, India, Sri Lanka, these are all in the range of 20%, whereas our corporate tax is 30%. But yes, I'm going to appreciate the fact that the National Board of Revenue has been reducing the corporate taxes 2.5% progressively for the last 2 years. So it has gone down 5%. But is it enough for us to remain competitive? Because if I'm not mistaken, the title today I can see in the background of the chair, Boosting Bangladesh's Trade Competitiveness. The first cost is the taxation. We need to address that because at the end of the day, I think it was Nora's presentation which said we need to supplement all these barriers with the competitive tax regime. So that's one way to go about. And then another thing, in fact, I started my career as a stockbroker. So one thing we have always learned is don't put all your eggs in one basket. And interestingly, 15.36% of the entire goods export of Bangladesh goes to Germany. That's just an example for you. Germany is buying 15.36% of the total exports of Bangladesh. Yes, I'm very thankful to Germany, but literally we are dependent on one country here. And then we're talking about 45 to 50% market share in the European Union. And then there's the US markets, but barely 1% market in Africa, barely 11% market in Asia. Middle East has about 3% market share. So yes, export diversification is a huge challenge, but I'll also be honest with you, we have been talking about diversification, but we're not acting on it. The reason being, my remarks are going to be more the country-centric sense. So for example, I'll just give you a bright example. Made in Bangladesh, this is something that has put Bangladesh on the global map. And yes, we are proud of the fact that the apparel manufacturers has given Bangladesh a name in the global arena. But at the same time, all the incentives that we are giving to them, we need to emphasize on the other thrust sectors. We have 6 to 8 emerging sectors which are not necessarily getting the same facilities. Just a brief example for you, the second largest export product, which is leather and footwear. For example, the bond license. All garment manufacturers, they get years of bond license renewal every 3 years. But when it's a footwear exporter or a leather product exporter, they have to renew every 1 year. Why is this disparity there? We need to give, we need to apply the RMG success model across all these sectors. We've got footwear, we've got ITES, we've got agro processing, we've got various other service sectors. So of course, yes, we've got about 52% of the total GDP going to the service sector. Now, speaking of the, I just recall the enhanced integrated framework of the WTO. And the technical support policy provides these access, they provide access to the EIF for 5 years after graduation under the current scheme, which can be actually enhanced. And a lot of things, we're going to lose our preferential treatments, the S&D treatments, the duty-free, quota-free access, which is going to increase our tariffs by 8 to 10%. Already, the tariff rates are very high. So of course, we need to engage our product diversification, market diversification, and export diversification. Now, how? Like I said at the very outset, before we all started, I'm not a big fan of the preferential trade agreement. This is a personal opinion strongly, but free trade agreements are the way forward. Yes, Bangladesh is a member of SAFTA. Bangladesh is a member of the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement and many others, but we need to focus on BIMSTEC, and then we've got the RCEP, the One Belt, One Road, ASEAN, COMESA. These trade blocks need to be our top priority because, again, like I said, 11% of our export is going to the Asian markets. But if we have those agreements, we'll have to open the markets. And at the same time, I must say that the private sector sometimes does feel threatened to open their markets to the foreign investors. But at the end of the day, it's not, when it comes to FDI, we're not actually just concentrating on the money coming into the country. We're also talking about the tech transfer, the technical knowledge, the experts coming in and changing the dynamics of how we're doing business. That also helps you to uplift the brand image of the country. And of course, Bangladesh has a very high credit rating. You know, I mean, we have never delayed our payments and so on. At the same time, these foreign experts can come in, investing in technical know-how, and also strengthen the cottage, micro, and the SME sectors. But these are actually the backbone of the economy. And at the same time, unfortunately, they only contribute to 25% of the country's GDP. Whereas in this region, or if you say China, for example, 60 to 70% of the GDP contribution comes from SME. Yeah. Malaysia, India, they're all 40% and above. Vietnam, the same. So, of course, you said that we have to have comparative tariff rationalization compared to Vietnam and India and all these places. We also need to see where is our FDI going in. Vietnam is a huge challenge for us. India is a huge challenge. That's why SEPA, we have the former Commerce Secretary who's working on the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with the Indian counterparts. At the same time, I also think that when we talk about the transition period of post-LDC graduation, we can extend it further. In case of the pharma sector, we have certain preferential treatments until 2030. Also the same for the IT sector. So basically, sector-wise, we can actually start negotiation. And at the very start, I also mentioned that, you know, we export a lot of unconventional products in small quantity with great demand in international market. So the potentials of these unconventional products need to be explored. We need to create market access digitally in this digital world. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's the digitization. So we can use, I always say this example of Alibaba platform, who's always, trying to work with the cottage and micro entrepreneurs and giving them global market access with the, access from a smartphone. We can do the same integration here. We can get into partnership with our foreign counterparts that will actually help us, export these unconventional products and also add to the product diversification basket, because the time is running out. 2020 right around the corner. So yes, there's something that we need to act on. And I will also urge PRI, because first of all, thank you for taking this initiative. I would also urge that, that there's a LDC graduation implementation and monitoring committee of the Prime Minister's office, where the tariff rationalization has a separate subcommittee, which is headed by the Commerce Secretary. The presentation needs to be passed on to him. I will definitely take it up because I'm also a member of the committee with him, and I will talk to him and, maybe even work together with the World Bank on how to, implement all these that we have been discussing today. The last 1 year, we have been talking about the problems we are going to face. But right now, I think time is running out. It is of essence that we start implementing these issues and maybe hopefully take it forward and, save the private sector from being pressured post the graduation, because at the end of the day, in the 8th five-year plan, it is mentioned that 82% of the contribution will come from the private sector. So you need to save them, and they also contribute to more than 78% of the national revenue. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I have word from the Honorable Minister's office that he would like to give his, address because, he has other compulsions. I would request Dr. Razak to just hold on. We will, once the minister is finished with his speech, we will pass on to Dr. Razak, and we'll have some comments to Rizwan Rahman's speech as well. Okay. So, আমি এবার মাননীয় মন্ত্রী মহোদয়কে অনুরোধ করব উনি যদি এই সুযোগে ওনার বক্তব্য আমাদের দিয়ে দেন। মাননীয় মন্ত্রীকে আমি অনুরোধ করছি। আমার অনেক মানে আই এম সরি যে এই কোভিডের দিনে আপনার সাথে দেখা করার সুযোগ পাচ্ছি না। আমাদের বয়সে একটু আমাদেরকে কেয়ারফুল থাকতে হয়। সো আমি আপনার অফিসে যাবার ইচ্ছা থাকলেও যেতে পারিনি, বাট আপনি আমাদের সময় দিয়েছেন। We are grateful, profusely grateful. আপনার এই অল্প সময়ে আমাদের অনেক কাজে দিত। Thank you so much. May I now invite Honorable Minister to share his ideas and thoughts with the participants here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really, I'm sorry that I shall have to leave. I shall have to go for some other things. So that's why I requested to give me a chance that I can speak now, so I can have little time to go somewhere else. Thank you all dignitaries and all the speakers. I saw our Honorable Member of Parliament also there. So thank you everybody. So let me start with something. This is the topic is boosting Bangladesh trade competitiveness. Yeah, that's good. And here we have our one of our secretary, former secretary also, BFTI, he's also there. So let me start. Trade, now Bangladesh trade is recognized as engine of economic growth, an integral part of development of a country. Over the last decade, Bangladesh achieved a remarkable socio-economic development under the visionary leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The economy grew consistently at a high rate, with an average of 6.3 during last 10-11 years, from 2009 to 2021, this period. However, due to COVID-19 pandemic, growth slowed down to 3.5% in the year 2019-20, but it rebounded to 5.47% in year 2020-21. We're expecting 7.2% GDP growth in the current fiscal year 2021-22. As a result of our capita GNI rose to $2,554, and the GDP size is around $400 billion. The IMF has also forecasted that growth rate would be 6.6% in the current fiscal year, ending in the coming June. To meet the needs of its growing economy and boosting trade competitiveness, particularly export growth, Bangladesh needs to improve its transport and logistics system, productivity, trade, infrastructures, trade facilitation system, trade financing mechanism, and ensuring participation in global value chain. Beside that, our keynote speakers also mentioned some points today that is really to understand, and really that we shall have to take under consideration, because there are a lot of questions came in between what they pointed out. Along with economic growth, Bangladesh has also been able to achieve remarkable success in social sectors. During the last decade, Bangladesh has attained great success in poverty elevation by ensuring effective redistribution of resources through pro-poor and inclusive growth strategies. The poverty rate declined to 20.5% in 2019 from 40% in 2005. Average life expectancy rose to 73 years from 67 in 2005. These are just few examples We have a lot of things to mention. In all these developments, trade, particularly export sector, has contributed immensely. Our export increased every year with the only exception of 16.9% negative growth in fiscal year 2019-20 due to, we all know, due to pandemic. However, due to quick and prudent policy support and stimulus package of the government, our economy and export sector recovered very quickly and registered 15% growth within fiscal year 2020-21. The upward trend in export earnings continued and achieved 28.4% growth in first 6 months. The current fiscal year, that is during July 2021. This quick recovery has been possible due to a solid macroeconomic foundation developed over the years. Timely government incentive packages offered to the business enterprises, as well as efforts and hard work of our vibrant private sector, also heavily contributed to such quick recovery. As you may be aware, the apparel or the ready-made garment sector of Bangladesh has made remarkable success. This is the largest manufacturing sector of the country, with around 4,500 factories, which employed more than 4 million people. 60% of them whom are women. The R&D sector has also been playing a crucial role in women empowerment and gender equality. Around 81% of total export earnings from the R&D sectors allowed. From this market share in global R&D exportation is about 6.5%, and the country consistently remained the second largest exporter of R&D products, just after China. To support this sector, many other backward and forward linkage industries have developed in the country. Our entrepreneurs are now very confident and experienced. They are capable enough to manage crises and adjust with any kind of sudden changes. The best example is that during the pandemic, while many buyers are cancelling their orders, many of our R&D industries quickly started to produce and export personal protective equipment or PPE, like face masks, gowns, gloves, etc., which was acclaimed by the global community. This shows the extraordinary adapting capacity of our industries. Moreover, other sectors of the country, such as pharmaceuticals, leather goods, agro-processing, home appliances, home textile, IT, and many more sectors are developing. These sectors are also creating jobs and income opportunities for the people of society. The Bangladesh government has formulated all of our program with short, medium, and long-term targets to address this crisis arising from COVID-19 pandemic. A total of 28 fiscal and stimulus packages amounting about to $22.08 billion, which is 6.23% of our GDP, has been undertaken to facilitate the implementation of these strategies. Many of these stimulus packages are directly targeted to support and trade and business activities. In order to ensure smooth and sustainable graduation, Bangladesh is exploring all the possible options, such as pursuing for extending the trade ISMS beyond the graduation for a certain period, pursuing for getting transition period for the graduation LDC as provided in EBA and GSP Plus, like special arrangements in other countries. GSP schemes, negotiations for including PTA and FTA and SEPA with potential trading partners for creating new market access opportunities. More importantly, Bangladesh government is in the process of developing policies and strategies to enhance overall trade-related capacity and competitiveness to overcome the probable negative impacts of the graduation. We all know that after the graduation, we lose a lot of facilities and other things. So we shall have to be prepared for that. They have formed a national committee and 7 subcommittees on graduation, which are working on all graduation issues, including formulation of a smooth transition strategy. I think today's discussion, the keynote speakers has already mentioned a lot of points. They have shown a lot of in their chart. So what to do, what is required to do. So I think this also will support to work on this thing. I mean, that can be a guideline also for today's discussion. We are currently implementing SDGs. We have also national developing goals and vision. Our government, led by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, has set the vision 2041, through which we want to be a developed and prosperous nation by 2041. Our ultimate goal is to realize the dream of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who dreamt for a transforming Bangladesh into a Sonar Bangla, a hunger-free and poverty-free country. For achieving all these goals set nationally and internationally, we need to develop our capacity and efficiency. Also, Bangladesh has performed so far very well in international trade. We are also facing challenges and constraints in many areas. Our product basket as well as export destinations are still limited. Our productivity, competitiveness, trade infrastructures, logistics, trade facilitation system, trade financing mechanism, participation in global value chain, capacity to comply with various requirements of international trade need to be enhanced in order to gain more from trade. Beside our human and institutional capacity need to extend to make the trade competitiveness, and we shall have to see the tariff things also to make it more modern. However, Bangladesh has made significant progress in digitalization, which is contributing a lot in our socio-economic development. Now we can reach and deliver services to all levels of the society using online system. The significance of digitalization has become more visible during this ongoing pandemic. We could continue our activities, including trade, education, health services, running by using the digital platforms. We are also keen to take advantage of the 4IR, particularly in our industries and production system. All the areas are at most important for us to take more benefits from the evolving global trading system, including the global value chains. Above all, the government of Bangladesh is working sincerely to boost the trade competitiveness through improving the transport and logistics system, revisiting the trade policies, digitalizing our service, comply with labor standards, increasing productivity, rationalizing the trade cost, and engaging with the global value chains. And that's all I want to end with here. And I will, whatever discussion comes up, I will request to make a proper paper for that can help us to go and look into that and go forward. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
ধন্যবাদ, আমাদের আন্তরিক কৃতজ্ঞতা জানাচ্ছি আপনাকে, আপনি আমাদেরকে সময় দিয়েছেন এবং জাতির পিতা বঙ্গবন্ধু শেখ মুজিবুর রহমানের যে স্বপ্ন সোনার বাংলার ট্রেডের মাধ্যমে কিন্তু আমরা সেই স্বপ্ন অনেকটা পূরণ করতে পারছি। ট্রেড হ্যাজ বিন দ্য ড্রাইভার অফ বাংলাদেশের ইকোনমিক গ্রোথ। আমরা মনে করি ইট হ্যাজ বিন আ বিগ ড্রাইভার এবং এই অনুষ্ঠানটি সামান্যভাবে হলেও সেই গোলের প্রতি আমরা কন্ট্রিবিউট করছি। আপনাকে অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ। Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for taking the time. I now pass on the floor to Dr. Razak, our very own Dr. Razak, and a lot has been said about Bangladesh's graduation in 2026, LDC graduation, and here is one leading expert on that subject. So, Dr. Razak, LDC graduation, trade policy, it's all yours. Your floor. And we will come back to Rizwan Rahman's, commenting on Rizwan Rahman's, some ideas, okay? Okay, Dr. Razak, please.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me well. And
yes, we can hear you.
Very loud.
And I'm most grateful for your very generous introduction on me. And to be honest, you have raised the expectations so much that, I'm kind of under pressure. But having said that, I must say this is such a wonderful study, excellent work coming along, as you can see from the PowerPoint slides. But also, some of the issues that the World Bank has dealt with is also what we are doing from PRI. And some of the results are, quite complementary in nature. So in my comments, probably I'm going to highlight a few things directly related to your findings that you have referred to. This is partly because I believe your objective is to get some inputs on the work that is being done. Okay, so let me do it in that way. At the outset, I would like to highlight the fact that that in absolute terms, Bangladesh's exports are low. Comparatively speaking, if you consider the size of the country, we should be in the $100 billion export club. There is no doubt in that. I can go on and on, but I think that point is well taken. But having said that, I would also like to mention is this: there are certain things I think the World Bank and us as well, we need to look into and explore further. So I'm also going to leave a couple of ideas for further research. And since in the World Bank you have got more financial resources and human resources, probably you could also explore some of the issues. So the first point that I would like to mention briefly, not a major issue, in your survival model, I can see you have found tariff impact is, I think, adversely impacting the performance. I would wonder why, because ideally speaking, exporting farms, they should not be subject to any kind of an import tariff. So I would like to understand the reason behind it, number one. Then also you have got R&D impact and also GVC participation positive. I think, your model is picking up the impact of ready-made garment farms. So ideally, I would like you to run a second model where you could exclude the RMG farms and then see any meaningful information we can get from that study. That would be extremely helpful. Moving on to LDC graduation, you have covered a lot, but I think some of the information either is not correct, although I haven't seen your report, but from the PowerPoint slides, I would like to say, or would need certain clarification. And if I may highlight a few of those. So the first point is, if you consider the graduation in the LDCs, the most likely scenario, Nora, is this: Bangladesh is not going to get GSP plus. Bangladesh is not going to get standard GSP in the European Union for clothing exports. Okay, because there is a new GSP proposals, that have now been shared with everyone and will be discussed in the European Parliament. As part of that, we have seen that the proposal is as such, Bangladesh's clothing farms, they are not going to get any duty-free benefit whatsoever in the European Union. And we from PRI, we have written a lot, and we can also share with you the papers that we have done in that context. So that's number one. The second point is, in one of your slides, where you mentioned the tariff implications that is going to be in the Chinese market, you have shown, I think, 2.5%. I believe you're using the old WTO data. That particular work WTO did when China did not give us 98% duty-free coverage. If you bring that into consideration, now Bangladesh has got 90% duty-free coverage, then effective duty hike on Bangladesh's imports after LDC graduation in Chinese market will be around 20%. So that number needs to be corrected as well. Third thing, for the Canadian market, your analysis is correct, but I think you need to clarify that under Canadian general GSP, textiles and clothing items are excluded. So no developing countries, they can claim a duty-free access even under Canadian GSP for developing countries after LDC graduation. So I think, that point I also wanted to highlight. Now, the other thing is, moving on, is that you mentioned about the 22% implications, or 22% revenue fall, export revenue drop after LDC graduation. Here, I think we need to concretely mention that scenario does not consider 3 other implications. If you would consider those 3 things, then your estimated implication would be much higher. For example, I think you have only considered the tariff preference, and if the tariff preference are going to be vanished, what's going to happen? But also we need to keep in mind, as I already mentioned, in the European Union, Bangladesh will not be getting GSP plus, not even a standard GSP. So that impact will be amplified by the fact that Bangladesh will have to pay MFN tariffs on ready-made garment exports. So that's the number 1. Number 2, in this kind of analysis, the rules of origin impact is never estimated. So for example, like, when we graduate, so that means the LDC rules of origin will not be, implied, and the rules of origin requirements will be more restrictive. So that will also affect our export performance. And the third thing is, Bangladesh also has currently the cash assistance for exporters, which is quite significant, from between 5% and 20% of the export revenue. If you are also going to withdraw that cash assistance, then the impact on exports will be even higher. So I think at least you need to mention, these 3 things that should have implications for the export revenue as well. On tariff rationalization, I take your point. I think the simulations are more or less what we did from PRA as well. I have got, I think one issue that Dr. Sadiq Ahmed raised, but I think that issue needs to be correctly pointed out, because this is such an important issue. Is this: if you have very high tariff rates to begin with, just the case of Bangladesh, then if you are going for any bilateral FTA, then the trade diversion impact is going to be severe, right? And in a way, that will imply, basic economics text will tell us, that will imply that Bangladesh's government will be subsidizing the countries from where we'll be importing after our bilateral FTA. So if that could be India, and India is exporting more after a bilateral FTA, there is a possibility that part of our lost revenue will be seen as kind of subsidizing the Indian exports. I mean, it's equally true for China as well. So the most important implication that needs to be drawn from this kind of analysis is this: maybe for Bangladesh, the right approach will be first go for unilateral liberalization, and then consider undertaking bilateral FTA. Otherwise, the trade diversion will be huge, and we know that the consequences, it has got huge adverse consequences for welfare as well if we cannot prevent trade diversion. Now, moving on, I would just like to end with, I think, a couple of points. These are more kind of areas for further research, but I think will have extremely important implications for Bangladesh. The first point is, we have always struggled. I think our chairman, Dr. Jayadi Sattar, and I believe Sadiq Bhai will also agree with me. We have always found it so difficult, to convince the policymakers. And I tell you why. Your chart, the chart you have shown, the relationship between tariff rate and economic growth. In that chart, you see Bangladesh is a clearly outlier. Okay. So I know you haven't done maybe any modeling work on that. You have done some only the kind of a scatter plot. But from that kind of analysis, Bangladesh is a clearly outlier. So a model which cannot predict Bangladesh well, or is an outlier, then from that model, we cannot infer any policy reference, because we can't simply explain Bangladesh. Now, the implication is the policymakers in Bangladesh would like to know, with this tariff kind of a situation, they are already achieving high growth rate, 78%. Unless we're able to say, by cutting down that tariff 20%, maybe we can achieve double-digit growth rate. Only then it will be more convincing. But in that context as well, Nora, we have a big challenge there. I know these days we are undertaking the same research, time and again. but we are ignoring, some of the more fundamental challenges, that we are seeing. For example, you see, GVC is a very good thing, a global value chain, and that leads to export success. But you see, if you would look at the recent data, those data tell us very clearly that because of global value chain trade, export orientation in many countries have actually fallen. I know you have given an example of Cambodia, you have given an example of Vietnam. We all know the example of Vietnam. But apart from those two countries, and anyway, Cambodia is a small country. For every large country, what we have seen a fall in export GDP ratio. And one reason for that could be people are doing more GVC-led trade. And under GVC, adding value is so difficult, you say. One question for us to understand, why Vietnam, that an economy of $400 billion, will have an exports of $336 billion, and again, have the same kind of growth rate of Bangladesh. So we're talking about here two different models. So maybe, from your sources and from your analysis, you could help us understand the scenario. Like, is it the fact that the value addition out of Vietnamese export is much lower than what we're having in Bangladesh? So the point I'm trying to make here is this: what we are trying to promote here. Are we just trying to say that, okay, let's promote exports and that will have, other benefits, or we're trying to promote growth, through our exports? I think those two have a different kind of a connotation, especially after GVC. The trend is such. I can tell you about Indonesia, India, Bangladesh is of course a country where the export GDP ratio has fallen. Okay, so that's one thing. My final point will be a pretty simple one, but this has not been discussed in the context of Bangladesh, that well. And here it is. You see, in Bangladesh, we know that our tax GDP ratio is quite low. And many people would argue, especially the private sector might make the point, that had actually helped them grow, you see, with that kind of a low growth rate. So the moment we are going to give a lot of emphasis on domestic resource mobilization, and that will require reducing import duties and then expanding domestic taxes. One question could be then the private sector will be hard unless the public sector can utilize the resources well. The adverse impact on growth cannot be sort of addressed. So one issue for us is always us to remind the fact that within the public sector, I think there is no alternative than to improve the efficiency in resource uses. I think those few points I would like to, I thought of sharing with you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Isaac. As expected, I mean, you've gone through the presentation with a professional, laser, I would say. And I think you've come out with very, very, poignant ideas here, and some worth, reflecting on. Rules of origin, yes, plays a significant part. So you can talk of all the preferences that are lost or gained, but if rules of origin become stiffer than before, then you've got a problem that needs to be addressed. Of course, I guess when he was talking about trade diversification, I think he was referring to trade diversion. In any FTA, Bangladesh, as an outlier with very high tariffs, will be facing trade diversion. And here, with China and India being the two largest trading partners of Bangladesh, I don't know how Bangladesh could, benefit from an FTA with any one country. They would have to do it with both. Otherwise, the trade diversion cost would be even higher. So but this idea of global value chains that you bring out, and I think the research work done by Dr. Nora and Dr. Lakatos shows that GVCs are useful, beneficial to export expansion. But you also point out the fact that Vietnam is an export powerhouse today with very low value addition, domestic value addition. I think it's necessary to reflect domestic value addition in a product, export product, versus value addition in an export product. So these are complexities of the game here. on this idea of export GDP ratio falling and meaning that, exports are not doing well, I have a little difference here because, in the case of Bangladesh, nominal GDP growth has been, growing at, average of 14% in the last 10 years. Now, for export GDP ratio to rise, you would have to grow on an average of 15% plus, 15 to 20%. And that is a very high growth rate too. Bangladesh, I think, can expect 15 to 20% growth rate if it diversifies its exports, because for non-government exports, Bangladesh's share of the world market is infinitesimal and there is no demand constraint. And so there again, we have this problem, tariffs, as the finding goes, tariffs are a problem for export diversification as well. And therefore, it is also a problem for the higher export growth that we can expect from our non-government exports. I will now, it is time to open the floor, but I
don't have much.
There are lots. Got the participant that's
56.
56 participants. We'll
has been waiting very patiently, but we can still open it for a few minutes. Okay.
Just one clarification. I think that we can take it, later on. In your simulation on revenue loss and all that, I was looking at the amount of the loss, which sounded very high. And part of the reason that I see is that your import response to substantive reduction in tariff is very low. The additional imports are very small, 2.4% growth. Now that it opens up a huge issue. The issue is if imports are not price sensitive, as your calculation would suggest, then what is the problem? There is no trade protection then in that sense, because import substitution is not really going to be hurt, because import demand is growing only so slowly, the rest of the economy will remain virtually insensitive to the tariff increase. That seems a bit contradictory, and we can take it up later on. You might want to take a look at the import elasticities of demand. But the whole idea of trade reforms was that it will stop some of the domestic high-cost domestic industries, which will mean that demand will switch from the domestic economy to import, and they will go to a cheaper source. If that doesn't happen, but then by implication, the domestic economy is not doing that bad. So there is a bit of tension that we may want to take a look at.
They can, they can look at some of these things. I think it's time we can open the floor to any questions, any interventions that anyone would like. You can raise your hand if you like. I don't think I can see the. Yeah. Oh, by the way, is Dr. Jafaruddin still there? The former Secretary of Commerce and now the Chief of Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute. Is Dr. Jafar still around? Somebody raised. Dr. Mohyuddin Alamgir, I can see, has a raised hand. Okay, please, Dr. Alamgir, go ahead. I'm glad that you're watching us from the Philippines. Your turn. Dr. Alamgir?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. I have to thank the World Bank colleagues to summarize in 1 hour and a little bit more what Zaidi, Sadek, and to a certain extent, Selim Rahan of Sanem has been telling us for the last 15 years. And so there was really no value added in the World Bank presentation, except that it was very methodical. It had some refined methodology. But the point is, we are focusing on, and we have an honorable minister here, a political representative. He needs to learn as to A, how do we expand export, the value exports, whether you look at it, whichever way you look at it. B, how do we diversify it? Now, tinkering in a new classical way with only rates, tariff rates, this, that, etc. Zaidi, you have been telling us on that. will not complete the task, will not do it. You will need structural approach to it. And both Rizwan and Razak hinted at both. Rizwan talked about foreign direct investment. So foreign direct investment, export processing zones, research and development, innovation, skill development. Those are some of the structural factors that you have to bring in order to introduce new products, stay with those new products, and expand their share in the total export volume. Without that, I don't see how just following what Port Zaidi has been telling us for 15 years. I mean, he has been telling us, we don't need anymore. I mean, he has been great at it.
About 15 years. You made a great contribution here. You said these new.
Please look at the structural factors. That's all I say.
Yeah, thank you.
If you want to help the honorable minister.
Yes, we should take this on board. Structural. We need structural change. Thank you very much for your kind intervention. There was a question from Professor Helal Ahmad. Okay, one is a basic question. What tariffs are we talking about? Yes, these are applied tariffs we are talking about. Okay, the other question was, are there any recent estimates of effective rates of protection? Effective rates of protection computation at the firm level was done by PRI. The last, on the basis of firm level survey, the last was done in 2012. And then there was some update on the basis of, some updated data back in 2018 or 19. Yeah, there are measures of effective rates of protection, but the changes in nominal rates of protection and what Dr. Nora pointed out, the divergence between the average tariffs on output and the average tariffs on inputs tell us the story about effective rates of protection. It tells you that effective rates of protection have not been going down as expected, although we say that the average tariffs have been coming down since for the last 25 years. So the divergence between average tariffs on output and input has remained very high, and that tells us that effective protection has been very high. So that's, Nora, would you like to add something on that?
Yes, I would like to make some comments after we collect all the feedback. So yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let's see if there is anything else coming up. Any other raised hands? I don't see any raised hands unless it's in the distance, unless Karo Hath দেখা যাচ্ছে?
There's nothing.
Okay, Nora, it's your turn. I don't think that.
Don't we want, Mr.
No, what do you respond? And then I'll pass on to it. Yes, Nora, it's your turn.
Yes, thank you. I will start and then I will also ask Chila if she wants to complement. But
then we will
first of all,
hear last words from our special guest.
Yes. So look, these are very valuable comments, and that's exactly why we are organizing this type of consultations to make sure that we are taking your feedback on board. But I will start my intervention, which I believe was a fundamental question. So why do you do this analysis? Why do we promote exports? Well, it's because we need to increase exports for growth. I think slightly disagree with the export contribution story to growth that was said by Mr. Razak, because actually there are a number of studies which show the declining trend of growth contribution from manufacturing exports to GDP. So we need to diversify exports. We need to increase competitiveness because exports will not contribute to growth as they did in the past. It was identified as one of the key growth constraints for the future. And I also agree that many of the things related to tariff modernizations have been covered before, but still there is lack of implementation on those issues. And what we are trying to show to understand, how can we unlock those reforms? So we need to understand what are the implications for that tariff modernization, what else needs to be done to perhaps facilitate the implementation of it. So we have all these tariff-related reforms, but I think what we are also trying to say with this analysis for the CEM is that we have to go beyond tariffs. We need to engage in the modern trade agenda. And that's what we are trying to show, that by incorporating services, incorporating FDI, looking at the R&D component of different imports and exports. So this is how we can accelerate the contribution of trade to growth. And I think perhaps we did not focus extensively enough on these new elements in this presentation. Probably in the report, we will do a more balanced presentation of results. The focus was on tariff modernization because it's the topic of discussion at this stage, also because of the LDC graduation. But we definitely emphasize the new elements, also skill developments and all the structural approach. Probably seeing that whole trade chapter in the growth context will also help, with how trade will contribute to growth. And so we will clarify all these concepts. Now, on some of the comments on LDC graduation, just to be clear, what we showed here in terms of tariff modernization results, these are not related to LDC graduation. So we are simulating a gradual reduction, which basically follows the 5-year plan, where we have like 2% reductions in each year. And so that's what we tried to show here. It's not really related to LDC graduation. Thank you for all the points. So we will try to double check the data on China and Canada. And the GVC story, I have to mention it here, because the firm level analysis that we are doing, and this is really a novel data set, everything points to the positive impact of GVC participation. The export survival rate is much higher, so we will try to see what's happening also with the value addition. And but what we see in Bangladesh is that GVC participation is extremely beneficial to companies, not only in RMG, but all other manufacturing sectors that are covered in the data set. I would also like to make a few points which were raised by the private sector, because I believe we also need to listen very carefully. And yes, I agree, there is diversification in terms of goods, but also diversification in terms of the destinations. The technology transfer and digitization were mentioned as being extremely important for trade, and this is something that we will highlight in the report. Also, the regional integration agenda, so going beyond South Asia, so RCEP was mentioned here. Unilateral liberalization, I think it's also an important idea that we will take up. And in terms of
right,
yes. Yes, also relations with so new markets. I think it's something that we can consider, for instance, COMESA or so in a nutshell, this is from my side. I don't know if Chila would like to.
Yeah, there's one point that the private sector leader raised, which is that the contribution of micro and small and medium enterprises in Bangladesh to export is minimal. Now, how do we get these micro and small and medium, whereas in China, 60% of the economy is micro economy or exports, I don't know what he said. So how do we get the MSMEs in Bangladesh linked to the world economy through trade? That is a challenge for the future, I guess.
Nora, you missed two of the points that I had made in my introductory, which is the real exchange rate. We can't have a trade policy and export discussion without talking about real exchange rate, I believe.
Right.
That is a critical. So even if you don't do new research or whatever it is, at least you do not. Otherwise, the government will think real exchange rate don't matter. Number one. Number two is this employment issue is really a critical issue. I tell you, one of the reasons Dr. Mohiuddin Alamgir, you heard him say, because he was very cynical. Part of the reason is it is true that Zaidi Sattar and I have been working on trade liberalization for the last 20, 25 years. Nothing much has happened. And one of the main political debate that we've had is the industry, the left-wing economists in Bangladesh, they'll all rise up. No, this is a World Bank prescription. It will kill our industry. It will kill our employment. Now, we have to dispel that notion that exports increase it will lead to more employment than the reduction in. And therefore, it is, even if we don't report on this one, at least a new research, something like that, because without that, we will not have meaningful tariff reform.
I fully agree, yes, and I'm sorry I missed those. So we are looking at real exchange implications for export survival as well, and the jobs I mentioned will be tackled. Yes, thank you.
Right, thank you. Okay. Yeah, it's Dr. Sheila.
Thank you so much. I mean, so I think Nora addressed most of the main issues that came out of the conversation, but just from my point of view, Dr. Sadiq, so as I mentioned, I think the issue of unilateral liberalization, we would be happy to add that, and it's definitely very important. And related to this, I think Dr. Razak made a comment in terms of sequencing of reforms, right? So, you know, this issue also sitting in Indonesia, we sort of face the same conversations a little bit, but also in terms of when certain reforms need to be undertaken to maximize the benefits for the country. So in that sense, Dr. Razak, we hear your point on the sequencing, which should one come first, unilateral, bilateral, multilateral. So we would be happy to explore these issues in addition. So yeah, that's about it for me. Thank you.
That's great. I think we've got lots of things on the plate. Yeah. Now I think it's if I can, conclude the open discussions, I would like to invite our special guest who's been waiting with a lot of patience, Mr. Yusuf Harun MP is a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on the Ministry of Commerce. They look at policies and activities that the Ministry of Commerce does. So, they talk to the minister all the time and question some of the activities. So, but trade policy has been in his mind. He has been a business leader, president of the Apex Chamber, FPCCI. So he knows where the shoe pinches, I guess. So
thank you very much.
It's your floor.
Thank you. Well, lately I've been spending more of my time in politics, working with my constituency, rather than business directly. But I've been very happy attending here today because I really brought myself up to date with a lot of the changes or thoughts in the trade. Now, one thing we've been fighting all along when I was as a business leader was this protection of local industries. Now, I have a question that one study we never did is those industries which are enjoying high protection, how are they doing in Bangladesh? And what are their price levels? What are possible imports that may prove that they are not very efficient? This study has never been done, and I think we should look into that. Now, the question is, some mention has been made about it. We are not very price sensitive in terms of our imports. I'm not very sure that is correct. We really have to do some real research into that until we have a policy decision, firm policy decision. And the other point is I work with a local, what we call Women's Development Forum, where I have all the women in the area who are interested in another career. We work with them and some of them have done very well in certain areas. Now, question is, when they work locally and we want to have an exportable product, really they need to know what are the product qualities, what are the packaging, and what are the transportation mode, and they are not really knowledgeable about these things. They need to be taught that. So a reverse sort of training. So now this is absent in many areas. The government is now doing something in certain areas, but frankly, this is where the problem is, to link them up with the international market. That's what is absent there. That's why our SME participation in export is very low. And I think that's very important. The other thing is, we have talked about our tariff regime. In my opinion, I've done a lot of studies in my own way, as well as in the Federation. Certainly, we have very high trade protection, and that's not very helpful to our growth of exports. These are disincentive for exports, and these are really incentive for imports.
Yes.
Now, there's no question about it. Now, to what extent we should do what, that's another issue. That's a policy formulation issue. I think, frankly, our protection that we give to the industries, another negative side is, these are all not all time bound. This is indefinitely. But these must be time bound, and we must withdraw at least phase by phase over a period of time these protections to make sure they had enough time to make themselves efficient. So that's another issue we need to look at. Now, I'll go on the more fundamental side. We still haven't addressed the most important issue of what export we are already doing, which is basically our infrastructure at the ports, because very often, if you go across the border, there's no testing facility, there's no warehouse facility. So what we need to really establish before we try to improve our trade. The other thing is, in terms of our trade facilitation. See, we need, I was doing a study about 10 years ago. I don't know whether it's changed much. The time it takes to release a container from the port, the cost it takes per container compared to Singapore or some other destination. These are issues that we have to address if we want to be competitive. The other thing is, Canadian government did a research about 8 to 9 years ago on trade facilitation reform. And they came out with the conclusion that the world trade will increase by 2% if everyone carried out trade facilitation reform, particularly countries like us, where our actually trade facilitation reform gains will be up to between 15 and 20%. Yeah. Because we have so many negatives working against us. So this is another issue we should look into very carefully. Now, as far as regional integration is concerned, there are many, we take our immediate neighbor, India, many para-tariffs, which is really sort of disincentive for all of us. We are allowed a lot of, on the face of it, supports generous facilities, but frankly, when you go to do business, these para-tariffs and state duties, et cetera, come in the way. And
Non-tariff barriers, NTBs.
Exactly, NTBs. The other point I'd like to make is that on the tariff reduction, a lot of issues has been made and some proposal came from Dr. Razak and others. We should look into very carefully. And one thing I must say at the end of the day, the whole world is becoming knowledge-based, technology-based. And with the advent of e-commerce and e-trade, we really need to have our knowledge base much more stronger. And there, I think where there's a very weak link here. We really haven't done much. And this is where we are going to fall behind in future. So there's a few issues that I want to mention. The others have been discussed. The post sort of graduation, post
pandemic recovery.
These are issues that we have to address. We are trying to address. We have not done very badly, but frankly, good numbers that are coming out will be short-lived unless we really get our act together again.
It's a recovery process.
So with these words, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent advice to all those who are working on trade policy issues at the World Bank and PRI and all that. Dr. Hassan Mansoor, would you like to come in with a few words? Okay. So I think I take, I'm sure these points are taken on board. Protection, how are they doing? All the highly protected industry, mostly in the consumer sector in Bangladesh. Time-bound protection has become a critical, it has been taken on board in some of the committees that have been formed to rationalize tariffs. So time-bound protection is very. Women, really, this is a great point that you've made, that there are groups, there are enterprising women who are coming up, they're potential entrepreneurs who can be export entrepreneurs. But the link between what they do in the domestic market and the foreign markets, global markets, that link is not there and needs to be established, because domestic production is one thing, but producing for export is quite another. But these entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, have the potential to be exporters. And that link has to be established through more investment in this particular area. And I really thank Mr. Yusuf Harun for bringing up this particular subject matter. And I hope the World Bank looks into this and makes some progress. With those words, I think we've extended our, but we've given Honorable Minister the time that was needed. And since he had to move to some other, meetings, we had to make some adjustments in our time here. So I thank all of you again, my colleagues from the World Bank, friends who participated from different areas. We had Dr. Alamgir from the Philippines. We had Dr. Sheila from Indonesia and Dr. Sahib So and Nora from Thailand. So thank you all very much for your patience and understanding. I hope this discussion the exchanges that we had would make for a good country economic memorandum in the area of trade policy for Bangladesh. Thank you all very much and have a good evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.